Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Hold My Drink, where we navigate the news and politics with a chaser of civility. I'm your host, Jen, inviting you to grab your favorite beverage, sit back, and imagine with us how to create a new American identity together. Welcome to this week's Hold My Drink podcast. Today I have Irshad Manji with me and my co-host, David Bernstein. And Irshad is the author of several books, including The Problems with Islam Today,
The Trouble with
Islam Today, and Don't Label Me. So she also is the founder of Moral Courage College. She is working with David and I, or affiliated with Counterweight, and providing some materials for alternative ways to do diversity and diversity training. And we're going to get into that today. But before we do, I always have a drink for these conversations. Irshad, did you bring anything to drink today?
Of course I did. I knew who I was dealing with today. Now, this is milk. And I know it's not sexy, it's not exciting, but listen, when you're going to do like a long conversation that hopefully is substantive, you need protein. So I've thrown a little bit of, that brand Premium Protein, the shake, the protein shake. Anyway, I've thrown a splash of that into my milk just to fortify myself. And remember, for as lousy a Muslim as I am still Muslim. So hold my drink for me does not mean an alcoholic drink.
And nor does it need to be.
Right.
I like your milk.
Right.
David, do you have anything?
I have just water with me today, which is too bad because I'm working with you and I need to have a drink. Jews do drink, so I suppose I would have had like a glass of red wine. Because it's almost Shabbat.
That's right.
Well, Protestants drink too. And so I'm really excited about this. I made a cucumber vodka tonic.
Wow.
There we go. That's what we have.
So you just out of curiosity, yes. Jennifer, do you do you put slices of cucumber into the glass, or how does that work? Where's the cucumber?
I'm failing. I should have done that. But what I did is there's cucumber vodka, it's, already I buy it like that.
Oh, really?
And then I buy this sparkling water that is like a prickly pear cucumber sparkling water.
Ooh.
Right?
That sounds good. Prickly pear sparkling water.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I'm up in my game here.
Yeah, my God would allow that for me. So, I'm sold.
Well, next time we'll have that together.
There you go.
So, Irshad, I've got to tell you, I have a girl crush on you, and I want you to be my BFF. I want you to be my BFF. I love every time I see you talk, every time that we've talked, you just exude this compassion. You exude confidence. The way you speak, my first question for you, I've got two questions, but how are you so awesome?
Jeez.
No, seriously.
No. Listen, you need to speak with my mother, who would assure you that my so-called awesomeness is an illusion, okay? She rips into me every time we talk. And, well, she should, because she knows me in a way, Jennifer, that you don't. So I'm not awesome, but I try hard to live up to the values, that I express. And in fact, just before getting into this conversation now, I responded to somebody on Twitter who said that, she had discovered my work a few months ago, and she is now motivated to actually apply the lessons that I've laid out in Don't Label Me. And I responded to her simply to say, thank you for committing to be part of the solution, because it's so easy to point fingers at our so-called other and gripe about what they're not doing. The question really is, what am I doing to motivate my other to, mirror my behavior? What expectations am I setting? And I ended up my answer to her, or my response to her, by saying, it's called integrity, right? So here's the thing. I'm sick of working with dreamers. Dreamers are great, but it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to dream. Well, who I love to work with, because I expect this of myself, are doers who are also dreamers. But the doing comes, first and foremost, because that is how we literally have a movement. Emphasize the word move.
Well, there's so much to talk about there because you have started a movement, and it's one that we're so excited about and to be a part of. But before we get to that, I have one other question for you that's unrelated to the movement. In your book, Don't Label Me, it was a correspondent with Lil, your dog, who's
That's
no
right.
longer with
Conversation
us.
with
It
my
was
dog.
a conversation with Lil. Are you having a conversation with any other dogs these
No,
days?
Deep breath.
Yeah.
I miss my Lily Bean like no tomorrow.
Mhm.
And I will tell you, Jennifer, I never would have anticipated how in love I have become with our four-legged fellow animals. Um, they just insinuate themselves into your soul. And for this, I am so deeply grateful. I say all of this because I'm still healing from the loss of my Lily Bean. And I think post-pandemic, I will be adopting another senior rescue. Love the seniors. They all deserve a soft place to land. But for the moment, I'm continuing my conversations with her, and I kid you not, I really do have conversations with her. Obviously, when I made my book a conversation with Lily, it wasn't for me a gimmick. The thing is that in this book, she plays the role of the progressive who is constantly challenging me on my liberalism. And what that really is to say, Jennifer, is that, there are two warring sides of me. One is the side that says, Irshad, are you sure the progressives don't have a really good point here? Have you asked the questions you need to ask? Have you done the research you need to do? Have you shown the respect you need to show to those who profoundly disagree with your point of view? And the other liberal side of me says, remember what your values are. And precisely because you value, discussion, never lose your willingness to hear from your other, even when a particularly nasty progressive or conservative person tries to shut you down. So you can see, right, that Lily is the other side of me, and and she's right to challenge me. And by making the book a conversation, I'm hoping to role model what I am asking of others: intellectual humility, pluralism of peaceful ideas, um, and a respect for the universal, foible-ridden human condition.
Yeah.
Can I go a little deeper on that? So I'm struggling. I've recently left a job in a progressive Jewish organization, and have come out critical of what you might call critical social justice, wokeness, and I've written some articles, and I'm feeling the heat. And people are challenging me, and I like to be challenged. I agree with that. That really resonated with me, in saying that you really don't have standing to speak. You're a white male. I happen to be, by the way, half Middle Eastern. My mom is from Baghdad, Iraq. 50.4% Western Asian, according to 3andMe. But they're saying that I don't have standing to speak, that I've had my space to speak, and that I have to make space for others. And my answer is yes, you're right. I do have to make a concerted effort to help bring marginalized voices to the front. But at the same time, I don't agree that I now have to shut up. That it's no longer a conversation. That it's just one day. That I get to still talk back. And for that, I'm not getting any traction. And I've actually said these words, and I'd just love to get your thoughts on it. I believe there's systemic racism in America, but that America is not systemically racist. You may disagree with that, but are you okay including me in the conversation?
Right.
And so far, the answer is no.
Mm-hmm.
What does that bring up for you? Should I be more conciliatory on that? Should I just shut up? Or
of course not, David. Oh my God, please. No, don't ever shut up. Don't ever shut up. Here's the bottom line. As far as I can tell, and maybe I'm missing something, and I grant that I don't have all the answers. In fact, I have far more questions than I do answers. But I'm a student of history. And I studied actually and specialized in the history of ideas, otherwise known as intellectual history. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I studied is when ideas gain traction and how they fall out of favor after having gained traction. Mm-hmm. And over, my research has strongly suggested to me that the way progress is sustainable is when buy-in is cultivated from as wide a spectrum of people as possible, which is why the way we communicate our positions is at least as important as what we communicate. Because, of course, the content of what we believe will not really be effectively understood and interpreted in good faith if the way we're communicating it is abrasive and and aggressive, which is different from assertive, but abrasive and aggressive. This is where people who want to tell you to shut up are really missing the boat. They're missing the opportunity.
By the way, as well, on how I present those ideas too. So I don't want to let myself off the hook too much.
Oh, I don't think you are letting yourself off the hook. And here's how I can say that with some certitude. You already pointed out that you want to be part of the conversation. And you're asking, will you have me as part of the conversation? You're not making demands. You're making a request. So you're not letting yourself off the hook at all. And if it's true, and I have no reason to disbelieve you because I've experienced this and watched it also myself, if it's true that you're being told you have no place in the conversation about social progress going forward, that is a huge missed opportunity on the part of people who are telling you such things. Missed opportunity because ultimately their version of progress, which is highly unprogressive, will not endure. The more you restrict the number of voices who have standing in any given conversation, the more conflict you're going to sow, even among the voices that are in the conversation. It's and you wind up realizing, as we're seeing, frankly, a lot right now, and it's only going to get worse, I predict. You wind up having a lot of infighting in which people who fancy themselves enlightened wind up eating their own. Mm. Yeah. This is what they're not yet seeing, right. And they will.
It's not really a sustainable moral vision to try to cut some categories of people out and say you've already had your say. So I just published an article with a Muslim friend of mine named Suhail Khan. We've been doing Muslim-Jewish dialogue for many years together. And we wrote about the experience that we had in Muslim-Jewish dialogue. And in it, one thing that we learned is that making what I like to call standpoint claims actually don't work very well for dialogue. So if I say, you must accept my definition of anti-Semitism, which includes the view that any opposition to Zionism is inherently anti-Semitism, and you must accept my definition of anti-Muslim bigotry, which would include criticisms of people like Dan Pipes for being critical of Muslim terrorism and the like. We're not going to get anywhere. And instead, let's find areas where we can come together. And it was precisely because we ignored the standpoint claims that were so integral to sort of this critical theory approach to dialogue, if you call it that, that we were able to build a dialogue that in an enduring alliance. I'm wondering if you have thoughts on that from your own experience.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. First of all, remind me, David, to explain why I'm not a big believer in interfaith dialogue. But that being said, my own experience with people who approach, again, progress, from the critical race theory framework is that they dive into difference immediately. This is why it's not an enduring framework, because when you do that, when you dive into difference immediately, you fail to create trust. When you, on the other hand, try to seek what we have in common first, that is when you begin to develop trust with the other. That is how a relationship is built. And that is when, from a neuroscientific perspective, emotional defenses come down on both sides. And each can be a little bit more vulnerable with the other because they know that they are not in a situation where the other is going to jump down their throats. Right? Now, let me quickly say, for the record, the reason, and I think you and Suhail might be doing this differently than most interfaith dialoguers, but the reason so much interfaith dialogue in the past has not really worked well is that people tend to be so fixated on staying trustworthy to one another that they're too afraid at some point to use that goodwill to then bring up the differences and to ask one another, help me understand what is absolutely not obvious to me, but is to you, right? They're so afraid of losing, that goodwill that they stay in it for the sake of goodwill rather than for the sake of small t truths.
That's really interesting. I want to go back to something that David said, but also touch on what you just said there. We are operating in a world where there isn't a lot of good faith, where there isn't a lot of trust. And what you're doing and what we're all trying to do here is kind of reinvigorate that trust, that good faith, that dialogue. That said, because we're not always in that space, we're not always in the conversation like we are right now. Going back to what David said about, he's having these conversations in the Jewish space. I wanted to ask you, as someone in a world where we're always looking to check boxes, right?
Yep.
This intersectionality. I don't really check. I'm very waspy.
I don't even know what that means. When you say that, what do you mean?
It means white Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
Yes, but what does it mean? I know what it stands for, but what does it mean?
Yeah, it's almost pejorative, right? I mean, it means you don't have any boxes to check.
It means that you are culturally invisible.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the one box I have to check is the female, but even that with white women, there's all these claims now made, particularly through critical social justice, that white women are the reason why black men are going to jail, and white tears are the reason why. Right. So I mean, even that box of woman doesn't really get me very far. And so much like David, I have a hard time having honest dialogue. Mm-hmm. And I care so deeply about unity and equality and things like that, but I have questions.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the way that we're going about having this conversation is always getting us to that better place. Right. And so what would you say for someone who is, not in that framework of intersectionality that gives you a voice?
You mean as a white person?
As a white person. Yes.
Right. Right.
I mean, and I heard what you said to David, that, I mean, of course you shouldn't shut up. I mean, and I know that, but at the same time, we're almost taught to self-censor.
Of course.
Because if, no one wants to be called a racist, any of these terms that are any ists or isms,
or phobes.
Particularly when I'm working so hard to create and to do and to make that movement that you're talking about. And yet I find myself often self-censoring because of my identity.
Sure.
My visual identity, not my, my external identity.
In other words, the labels that other people throw on you.
Yes. Don't label me, but I'm like,
but they do.
But they do. So what do you do? So how do you?
Yep. So, first of all, let me assure you that what you're doing now, which is working with all kinds of people who are in it in good faith, is the right thing to do. You don't need to win over those who, will never stop labeling you. Some people might, but that's something that they'll have to choose for themselves. That's a decision they'll have to make for themselves to see the real you, rather than, the constellation of labels that they assume you are. Okay, you're not going to make them change their mind. You can't. Only they can realize that there's something behind those labels that surprises them, intrigues them, fascinates them. And for that reason, they'll want to engage. Now, beyond that, though, it would be interesting, Jennifer, if you have a relationship, a friendship with a person who thinks of themselves as progressive, to ask the kinds of questions that they probably have not been asked before, like, why is it that when it's wrong to collectively blame Muslims for terrorism, and it is wrong to collectively blame Muslims, why is it okay to collectively blame white people for the injustices, racial and otherwise, that continue to exist? I know that we all are complicit because we all uphold certain institutions and structures, but there's a collective blaming going on, and I'm just wondering why that's okay for my group. And you can say my group, and not for other groups. And you can assure your progressive friend, this has been weighing on me because I'm curious. And I want to know what I'm missing, what I'm failing to understand. That way, Jennifer, you enter into the conversation with humility. You accept that for now, you're a student of this other person, and that you're not here to start a debate with them. You're actually here to understand what you're missing, right? And see what they have to say,
Can I follow that
go
up?
ahead. Go ahead, David.
So you used the word debate, and it was actually what I was going to ask you about. So I grew up in what some have called Jewish debate culture.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where we debate. We debated
two Jews, three opinions.
Yes, exactly. And nowadays, though, by the way, they say in the current woke environment, it's three people, one opinion. That's okay. But I debated a lot with my friends through high school, through college. On Shabbat evenings, I would raise a question with my kids and now stepkids that we would debate. And I was always the devil's advocate, no matter what position it was. And it's how I learned. And now I'm trying to bring that sensibility out in the world, and it doesn't always work in the encounter with the other. How do I think about that in trying to actually make a difference in the world? Because if it's not working, then I better do it another way.
That's correct. That's right. Again, you're not going to get other people to change. if you're not willing to change. And that doesn't mean changing who you are or what your values are, but it can mean strategically changing how you communicate those values, right? So you just pointed out that, you grew up in what you call Jewish debate culture. One of the things that I have picked up on over the last actually few years, and not just few months, is that people generally are afraid of debate. By the way, I began learning how afraid people are of debate when I was traveling the world advocating reform in my faith of Islam. And, young, eager Muslims would quietly say to me, I love the message, Irshad, but I'm not an expert in the Quran, which is Islam scripture. I don't want to get into a debate with my uncle or with our imam, the Muslim equivalent of a minister. And over again, I realized just how ill prepared people feel to actually defend what they believe, if it's countercultural, right? If it's status quo, sure, they've heard a gazillion sort of explanations for why they believe what they're supposed to believe. But when it's countercultural, as you are and I am and Jennifer is today, it's really hard for people to stand up and explain to others why they feel passionately that they should be expressing the values that we share. So with that in mind, David, it's really important, I believe, push back if you disagree, to ensure that you're not turning discussions into debates, and that the moment somebody fears that this is going to be a debate and they therefore kind of back off, that you assure them, look, I apologize if I came off a little bit animated here. I assure you I'm not angry at all. This is what happens. This is what I sound like when I'm really into a conversation. So let me just take a deep breath and just calm down a little bit. I'm really enjoying this conversation, right? Assure them that there is no gotcha moment coming. And moreover, just as I explained to Jennifer, that you are asking from a place of curiosity, not judgment. That this is a sincere question, not a sarcastic one. And by the way, Jennifer, when I'm online and I engage in these kinds of conversations with people who disagree with me, somewhere in the first 2 rounds of engagement, I always say, I ask out of sincerity, not sarcasm, so that they know that my intentions and my motives need not be misread.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sincerity, not sarcasm.
Right.
That's, and also I really love what you said about you being the student. So as someone who's studied Chinese philosophy, in Taoism,
yes,
everyone,
I love Taoism.
Yes, I do too. That's why I studied it. I loved it so much. So China is my specialty, and what I love so much about Taoism is everyone's a teacher.
That's right.
From the lowly, whatever that would be,
that's right,
to the everyone is a teacher, and I just that
meaning that everyone has something to learn from another,
yes,
and therefore something to teach one another, right?
Yeah, right.
But I want to ensure that the listener understands your earlier point, which is that entering into a conversation, thinking of yourself and framing yourself as the student of your other is very powerful.
Yes.
Because humility lowers emotional defenses, right? And the other thing, since you brought up Taoism, I won't get into the weeds about it because obviously very few people have studied it. But one of the, tell me if you think, again, I'm sort of off on this, but I think one of the great teachings of Taoism is to simply trust the journey. Trust the journey. Don't resist it. Don't fight it. Be like water.
Be like water. That's what I was,
right.
Yep. Be like water.
Exactly. By all means, think for yourself. That doesn't mean that you have to, lapse into groupthink.
Right.
But understand that when you enter in a conversation with good intentions, the outcome will be what it needs to be.
Mhm.
So, David, I'm coming back to you on this. There is no need to want to change somebody else's mind. In fact, the moment they see that that's your agenda, which it shouldn't be, I'm saying be sincere about the fact that it's not your agenda. But if it is subconsciously your agenda, you, me, Jennifer, we will be busted. And that is when we lose trust, right? The agenda is not to change somebody else's mind. The agenda is to learn from them. And in the process of learning from them, you're actually doing something that is quite revolutionary. You are humanizing people who have your point of view, so that this person with whom you're engaging, if they walk away feeling respected by the conversation, it will be more difficult for them next time to demonize someone who has your point of view, because your presence will be top of mind to them. They will connect the other person who has your point of view with this wonderful conversation they had with you, and they will literally have to be that much more intentional about demonizing. So
that's water.
and that's
Pivot a
water.
little bit,
Exactly
Jennifer,
right.
to the organizational side of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we're at a very interesting moment. The diversity, equity, and inclusion idea has really come to the forefront of society. It was banned by the CRT training was banned by President Trump and reinstituted by President Biden. I know that you have some thoughts about the current model of critical race theory training that we see in a lot of corporations, a lot of organizations, probably a lot of schools, universities today. What are your thoughts?
I think you can anticipate what my thoughts are, but I'll boil them down to one phrase that I consistently use with people I work with, and that is diversity without division. That is the kind of diversity we ought to be teaching and celebrating. What critical race theory, or more to the point, the way it is practiced. Let me be really clear, by the way, just as I'm really sensitive about something here, just as I can't say that Islam is this or Judaism is that, because there are many ways in which an ism, or a philosophy can be practiced in and of itself, right? Islam, Judaism, or critical race theory are not the problem. It's the way they are implemented that becomes the problem. And that's why we have to question our human decisions about how to practice something. So with that in mind, it's not that CRT, critical race theory, in and of itself is a problem. It is that today, many practitioners of it are illiberal, do not want to even consider questions about it. And therefore, they practice critical race theory as if it is the only acceptable way to do diversity and inclusion. Okay?
Right, that's a very powerful insight. We can all agree, I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, that we've learned something from critical theory about how systems might work, or where that there might
That's
be
right.
there might be hidden forms of oppression that we might not see in our everyday lives, and that
That's
we have
right.
to struggle with that at a conceptual level, and yet at the same time not take it for granted either that it dictates all of reality. And sometimes they're teaching in a way that would suggest that it is the single explanation for why things
Yes,
are the way they are.
that's correct. And again, that's a human decision. It is not endemic to critical race theory. I know because I have studied critical race theory, from its very origins, right? So we can acknowledge that CRT has some important contributions to make, especially around, the discussion of power. But a contribution is not the totality of what needs to be considered. It is exactly that. It is a part of the explanation, not the single exclusive explanation of what ails our societies.
Mhm.
So go ahead, Jennifer.
And
Oh, I'm sorry.
You've really thought through. Oh, sorry, Jennifer. Did you?
No,
want
no,
to go?
no. Keep going. Keep going.
Okay.
I'll
So
interject
you
later.
really thought through what the alternative might look like, so much so that you've actually
Yeah.
developed an alternative
Yeah.
framework.
Yeah. So
Moral Courage
actually,
College, tell us a little bit about how that.
sure. Sure. So I'll connect it before I say more about it. I'll connect it to what we've just been discussing. So the way CRT is taught by human beings tends to translate into this, that diversity means division, that we need to divide and subdivide ourselves into categories, immutable categories. And the problem with that is not just that it fails to take into account the complexity of human beings and of individuals, but also the way CRT is taught tends to fix people in time and freeze them in place. And that is the problem with intersectionality. It suggests that each one of us lives at intersections. Now, I don't mind being at an intersection for a moment, but I don't live at an intersection. I move through it. And I live in a much bigger expanse of space than an intersection, because you can't know everything there is to know about me and that I consider important and meaningful simply by knowing that I'm a woman, that I am of color, or as I like to think of it, off color, that I am queer, that I am Muslim, that I'm able-bodied, and so forth. These are all, aspects of who I am. But that doesn't tell you what I think about really important issues and what my, core values are and what my moral commitments are, right? For you to know that, you would need to engage with me. And that is what brings us then to moral courage. Moral courage is diversity without division. And here's why. Moral courage quite simply means doing the right thing in the face of your fears. Now, I know in a divided time, what is the right thing, right? Somebody's right is somebody else's, shall we say, deplorable. So I'm going to get to that in just a second. But let's take that phrase, doing the right thing in the face of your fears, and start with our fears. What is it that we human beings fear more than anything else? Jennifer, if you haven't already, heard me talk about this, have you, by the way?
I hear a lot of what you're talking about, so keep going.
Okay, well, I was going to ask, what do you think that we human beings fear more than anything else?
Ooh, maybe I haven't heard that one. Being wrong, being called out in public, being shamed.
Okay, and what about you, David? What do you think we human beings fear?
I was going to say rejection, but I like the word shame even better.
Yeah, well, you two are definitely in the same realm. And what the behavioral scientific literature tells us is that we human beings fear more than anything else being judged. And of course, in this case, that means judged negatively. Yes, being shamed, being blamed, being thought weak or stupid or unworthy in any way by the group whose respect we most crave. Which is why, in any given situation, most of us will go with the flow, meaning we will lapse into the consensus that already exists within the group, our tribe. Instead, what we ought to be doing is exposing ourselves to different points of view proactively. And that means, yes, points of view that challenge and therefore help us clarify whether we are in fact doing the right thing. So you see, moral courage does not dictate to anybody what their right thing is. Moral courage is a particular method to help you clarify whether you are doing the right thing. And even if you say, well, yeah, I'm standing up to racism, Irshad, tell me that's not the right thing to do. No, I think that's the right thing. I'm good. I don't need moral courage. And I would say you're absolutely right that what you're doing is what you should be doing, but the way you're doing it may not be the most effective way, right? So if you're scorning, if you're humiliating, ridiculing, and mocking your other, don't expect them to suddenly see the light as far as you're concerned. If anything, because you are playing into their fears of being judged, you are making them more defensive and therefore probably more entrenched in the very position that you despise. So it's not just about what we stand for. It's also about how we express what we stand for. And that's why through the moral courage method, my team and I, we teach people that you don't have to compromise your values. What we teach you to do is stand for what you believe, and seek common ground even as you stand your ground. And the seeking of the common ground is about the how of communicating what you believe, right? Are you leaving the other people, the other person, the other party feeling respected by the conversation? That will go far further to motivating them to rethink their point of view than shoving your point of view in their face.
How does that play out in a workplace environment? I'm assuming that companies use your work. Maybe it's a school system. They're looking for somebody to help them navigate this great expanse we call diversity. And how does that play out when that you come in, you help them think this through? What does that do to the culture of the institution that you're working with?
Mm-hmm. Well, what it does to the culture is it makes the culture so much more inclusive than it would have been if they had taken a more conventional path to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And by that I mean, I've got a number of clients who say to me, the conservatives among our employees, for the first time, feel respected by this approach to diversity. And the progressives finally feel equipped to engage in a way that does not leave them feeling frustrated, because, Irshad, you have taught us that the point is not to change the other's mind. The point is to humanize ourselves to the other. And when we understand that that is the only agenda to come into the conversation with, it means that we have to be less aggressive and less abrasive in order to be seen as, human in a multifaceted way. So you see, I help my corporate and other clients reframe the point of engaging in conversations about diversity and inclusion. It is not to change minds. It is to touch hearts, which, interestingly enough, then has the effect of opening up minds.
We get back to water again.
Yep.
Right.
But with Counterweight, we use moral courage college. We promote that as something different than some of the critical race training. What would you say, though, to someone who is facing this in the workplace, where it's a mandatory training? Mm-hmm. It's a training that's based more on the critical social justice, so all the issues that we've been talking about, and even if that person has come and said, look, there's alternatives, there's Moral Courage College, have you heard of Irshad Manji? And they face that, just, they won't change. They just face a wall. What do you have any advice for them to try to? I mean, again, we've talked about, you're there to teach, you're there to ask questions, and I think one of our big things in Counterweight is coming with that open-minded. Hey, have you heard of other things?
Right.
Why do you think this
Right.
is the best? So we're teaching, asking questions. I think a lot of what you're doing. But if you just face a wall and it's like it's mandatory. This is the way we're doing it. We're teaching white fragility. End of story. And your job's on the line.
Yeah. Yep. I hear you.
What would you say to someone like that?
Well, couple of things. First of all, I would go back to the original point about having conversation before having confrontation. And I know what you've just said, Jennifer, that you've tried the conversation and it's getting nowhere. But my question is, have you tried it in the way that I would suggest you approach it, which is, talking to your employer about the fact that this is about diversity, right? So why is it that we have only one approach? Why not a diversity of approaches? After all, it's about diversity. So again, help me understand what I'm missing about why we have integrity, training our staff in diversity when we don't have a diversity of approaches. What is it? What is it that I'm not getting about that? Right?
Great question.
Can I press on that a bit?
Sure.
One of the observations I've had now is that what we sometimes consider representational diversity, identity-based diversity around
demographic
race,
diversity,
education, and so forth, because it sometimes comes packaged with this ideology, the critical race ideology or the critical gender ideology or both. It's overwhelming viewpoint diversity or cognitive diversity.
Yeah.
It's treating those as sort of subordinate, if serious at all.
Right.
Is more, and that what we really have to do is sort of restore viewpoint diversity to its proper place in the diversity conversation, so that when you do bring it to the workplace, you're talking about all of the above and not just
right. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. But again, if you go into the conversation full-throatedly pushing viewpoint diversity, you are the one who will be accused of having a dogma, right? And that kind of bulldozer approach in any situation tends not to work well, whether it's with your spouse or your children or your rabbi or your employer. So really find use the language of diversity, equity, and inclusion to show your employer how they're not living up to diversity, equity, and inclusion by dogmatically, adopting one approach. That said, if you're up against the wall, I would think long term. I wouldn't say, unless you absolutely have to, that you quit your job on principle. No, stick with it. Do the diversity, so-called diversity training, but make lots of notes about what you're being taught, what happened when you asked questions, and start preparing for a possible court case in which you point out that your freedom of conscience has been violated by religious imposition. Because at the end of the day, if you can prove that the way, again, it's always the way critical social justice and critical race theory have been taught to you amounts to a religion, then I think you've got a really important legal argument to make about how your own freedom of conscience under the U.S. Constitution in the case of America, and certainly under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in the case of Canada, has been violated. But it'll take you being diligent about making your notes, asking questions, noting again what happened when you asked questions, in order to show that this isn't just an assumption you're making about the ideology that is being shoved down your throat. It's more than an ideology in the sense of a philosophy. It's a dogma. Because here's what happened when I raised some gentle challenges about it. And only people who are steeped in dogma will try to shut down questions.
And the hope would be that once enough organizations or companies are faced with those kind of lawsuits or challenges, that they'll look for a landing pad of places like the Moral Courage College and other groups that are doing viewpoint diversity as part of their larger diversity initiative, so that there's a place to go, because diversity is really important, but it's not done in a dogmatic manner.
Right. And I have to say that, I'm not even going to wait, as you know, for these lawsuits to pile up and hope that, schools and employers will grudgingly settle for an approach like moral courage, lest they be taken to court. I'm already receiving more, inquiries than I can handle from employers who are beginning to see that dogmatic approaches to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, plants the seeds of resentment and ultimately of conflict. And here's the interesting point, folks, that a university might be able to stand that because academics, for better and for worse, mostly operate in silos. They don't rely on teamwork in order to move forward. But companies must rely on teamwork. They need collaboration for the sake of productivity, innovation, and ultimately talent retention. So in the private sector, not sowing seeds of conflict internally is everything. And that's why, already many employers are coming to seek out alternatives to critical social justice and critical race theory.
Well, y'all, I'm almost finished with my drink. David, do you have any final questions for Irshad?
No, I'm just so appreciative for this opportunity to engage with you on these issues that are really front and center for us. And thank you so much for your helping us think this through ourselves, because we all need to be coached along, and we all need to not just know how to argue about diversity, but actually present our views in the best possible way.
Right, precisely. Lead with our best foot forward and recognize that we do have a real, valuable contribution to make, not just to the issues immediately at hand, but also, to the larger sort of challenge of humanizing ourselves and developing relationships in a time when automation and artificial intelligence will be, making our humanity that much more difficult to express and discover. So when we take on a more humane approach to, pressing issues like racism and so forth, we are actually, again, creating a future in which we stay human despite the assault of the algorithms.
And Irshad, I just want to say it has been it's such an honor to walk this road less traveled alongside you.
Oh, right back at you, Jen. I know I'm not alone. And really, it can feel lonely, as you and David know. But we also must remember, through conversations like this and others, we are not alone. And like I say, Jen, you're doing the right thing by my lights, by immersing yourself in a community of misfits, who really appreciate what pluralism is all about.
Excellent. And pluralism. That's what we need to remember.
Right.
Thank you, guys.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Hold My Drink. Like or subscribe to the show and check out the show notes for links to source material and to our website where you can find what each of us is reading every week, different news with different views. If you have a topic that you would like us to explore, drop us a line. And join us next week as we say Hold My Drink and the conversation gets real.